The sabotage began the very next morning. When Kyung-soo went to his locker to get his homework assignment for advanced quantum physics, he found nothing but empty space. The papers he had spent 3 hours completing the night before had vanished, without a trace. He searched through his backpack, checked under his desk, and even looked in the recycling bins but found nothing. In his first class, the teacher asked for the assignment and marked Kyung-soo as having failed to complete it. When he tried to explain that his work had been stolen, the teacher looked at him with the same expression of doubt that all the alien faculty seemed to wear when dealing with humans. Humans are known for making excuses rather than taking responsibility, the teacher said in front of the entire class. Perhaps you should spend less time solving puzzle boxes and more time doing actual schoolwork. The other students laughed, but Kyung-soo noticed that some of their laughter sounded forced. He could see Vex and his friends trying to hide their smiles, and he realized exactly what was happening. During his next class chemistry lab, he discovered that his equipment had been tampered with. The measuring devices gave wrong readings, the heating elements would not work properly, and someone had contaminated his chemical samples with substances that made his experiments fail. Every result he tried to record was useless. When he reported the problems to the lab instructor, she shrugged her 4 shoulders and said, "Equipment failures happen human. Perhaps your species is simply not advanced enough to handle delicate scientific instruments." But instead of getting angry or complaining to the school authorities, Kyung-soo did something that surprised everyone. He adapted. That evening, he made copies of all his future assignments and hid them in different locations around the school. He put one copy in the library between pages of an ancient history book that nobody ever read. He taped another copy inside a maintenance panel in an unused corridor. He even sent a digital copy to his email account back on Earth, knowing that the signal would take months to arrive, but would serve as a permanent backup when his equipment was sabotaged again. He started building his own tools from spare parts that other students had thrown away. The machine shop had bins full of broken devices that the aliens considered worthless. But Kyung-soo could see how to combine pieces from different machines to create something new. He built a precision scale using springs from a broken chair and electronic components from a damaged computer. He created a heating element from wire salvaged from old light fixtures and power cells from discarded gaming devices. His homemade equipment was not as fancy as the school-provided tools, but it worked just as well. The alien students escalated their efforts. When sabotage was not enough, they began challenging Kyung-soo to contests that seemed impossible for any human to win. The first impossible challenge came from Kresh, who invited Kyung-soo to an underwater breathing contest in the school's swimming facility. The pool was filled with a liquid that contained dissolved oxygen, but only Kresh's species had gills that could extract it directly. "This should be easy," Kresh announced to the crowd that had gathered to watch. "Humans cannot breathe underwater, and no technology in the school equipment room can help with that." But Kyung-soo had spent the previous evening in the chemistry lab, not just completing his assignments but also studying the composition of the pool liquid. He had learned that the dissolved oxygen could be separated using a simple chemical reaction. When the contest began, Kresh dove into the pool confident that he could stay underwater for hours, while the human would be forced to surface in minutes. But Kyung-soo had brought a small device he had built from chemistry supplies. It was basically a portable oxygen concentrator that could extract breathable gas from the pool water and deliver it through a simple tube. He stayed underwater for over an hour while Kresh grew more and more agitated. The alien had expected an easy victory, but instead found himself competing against human ingenuity once again. The second impossible challenge came from Eula, who challenged Kyung-soo to survive in the school's cold weather simulation chamber. The chamber could create temperatures that would freeze human blood in minutes, while Eula's species thrived in conditions that made liquid nitrogen seem warm. "No human can survive the cold of my homeworld," Eula declared as they entered the chamber. "You will surrender before we even reach half power." But Kyung-soo had studied thermodynamics and heat transfer in his physics classes. Instead of trying to generate more body heat, he focused on preventing heat loss. He wore multiple layers of clothing with insulating air gaps between them. He covered his extremities with materials that reflected his own body heat back toward his core. He even ate high-energy foods that would fuel his metabolism during the test. When the temperature dropped to levels that should have been fatal for humans, Kyung-soo was still, moving around normally while Yula began to realize that the human had found another impossible solution. The third impossible challenge was the most elaborate. Yet Kor invited Kyung-soo to a strength contest using special rocks from his homeworld. These rocks were incredibly dense and had unusual properties that made them nearly impossible for anyone except Kor's species to handle properly. Each rock weighs as much as a small spacecraft, Kor explained to the gathering crowd, and they become heavier when exposed to the electromagnetic fields that most species generate. The human will not be able to move even the smallest one. But Kyung-soo had been studying physics and engineering since arriving at the school. He understood that the rocks became heavier due to electromagnetic interference, which meant the solution was not more strength but less interference. He built a special lifting device using principles of leverage and mechanical advantage, combined with electromagnetic, shielding materials from the school's maintenance department. The device allowed him to lift and move the rocks without his own bioelectric field, interfering with their strange properties, while Kor struggled to lift the rocks using only his natural strength. Kyung-soo moved them around like they were made of lightweight foam. Each victory made the alien students more desperate and more angry. They had tried direct competition sabotage and impossible challenges, but the human kept finding ways to succeed. Some students began to wonder if their teachers had been wrong about human limitations. Others started to question whether natural advantages were really as important as they had been taught. But the most shocking moment came during a memory and pattern recognition challenge arranged by Bricks. The alien had designed a test that required memorizing 1,000 different symbols in a specific sequence, then reproducing them perfectly, while solving mathematical equations that used 17 different number systems simultaneously. "This is impossible for any species except mine," Bricks announced proudly. "My brain can process information in ways that would cause permanent damage to inferior minds." The contest began with both participants. Studying the symbols and equations, Bricks memorized everything instantly, using his enhanced brain capacity, while Kyung-soo worked much more slowly, taking notes and drawing diagrams. But when the reproduction phase began, something unexpected happened. Bricks could remember every symbol perfectly, but he had memorized them as individual pieces of information. Without understanding the underlying pattern, Kyung-soo had spent his study time looking for connections and relationships between the symbols. Instead of trying to memorize everything separately, he had discovered that the symbols formed a logical sequence based on mathematical principles. Once he understood the pattern, he could reproduce the entire sequence without memorizing individual symbols. He could even predict what the next symbols in the sequence should be. When Bricks made his first mistake, trying to remember symbol number 437, Kyung-soo was still working steadily through the sequence using logic rather than memory. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the human defeated their greatest scholar, not by having a better brain, but by using his brain differently. After this victory, something changed in the school atmosphere. Some alien students began approaching Kyung-soo with questions instead of challenges. They wanted to understand how human thinking worked and why it seemed to produce solutions that their own mental processes could not find. But Vex and his core group of supporters were not ready to give up. They realized that individual challenges were not working and began planning something much more dangerous. "If we cannot defeat him alone," Vex said to his closest allies, "then we will face him together. One human against 1,000 aliens in a competition that will settle this question forever." The final confrontation was being planned, and this time there would be no escape for either side. Word of Kyung-soo's victory in all 3 trials spread through the Galactic Education Center faster than a hyperspace message. By evening, every student in the massive station knew that a single human had defeated 3 of their best athletes and scholars. The cafeterias buzzed with whispered conversations and worried voices as aliens tried to understand what had just happened. In his dormitory room, Vex stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His friends sat around him looking just as confused, and angry Kor kept flexing his massive stone fists as if he could not believe they had failed him. Zyla coiled and uncoiled her serpentine body nervously while Brix held his oversized head in his four hands. This makes no sense, Vex said for the 100th time that night. Humans are supposed to be weak, slow and stupid. The galactic database says they barely learn to leave their home planet. How can one of them beat us at everything? Trix, who had been quietly calculating numbers in his head, finally spoke up. I have been thinking about this problem. The human did not win because he was stronger or faster or smarter than us. He won because he approached each challenge differently than we expected. What do you mean? Kor asked, his voice rumbling. Like an avalanche, we all used our natural advantages. Trix explained. You used your strength. Zila used her speed. Brix used his memory. But the human did not try to copy what we were doing. He found completely different ways to solve the same problems. Vex sat up suddenly, his scales rattling with anger. So you are saying he cheated? No. Trix said slowly. He played by the rules, but he played a different game entirely. We were trying to be the best at what we naturally do. Well, he was trying to find the best way to win. The next morning, Vex called for a meeting in one of the abandoned storage bays deep in the lower levels of the station. He sent secret messages to students from every major species in the school. Reptilians like himself. Rock beings, like core gas creatures who floated in transparent suits. Snake people like Zila. Four-armed mathematicians like Trix and hundreds of others. By the time the meeting began, nearly 1,000 alien students had gathered in the vast, empty space. The storage bay had been designed to hold supplies for the entire station, so it was large enough to accommodate beings of every size and shape. Students hung from the ceiling, floated in the air, and spread across the floor in a sea of different colors, and Formsvex stood on a raised platform where everyone could see him. His voice echoed through the chamber as he began to speak. My fellow students, we face a crisis that threatens everything we have been taught about our place in the galaxy for generations. Our species have been told that we are the advanced civilizations of the universe. We have conquered worlds, built empires, and mastered technologies that other species cannot even understand. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Students nodded their heads, tentacles, and other appendages in response. But yesterday, a single human, a member of what we have always considered a primitive species, defeated our best warriors, our fastest athletes, and our greatest scholars in direct competition. This cannot be allowed to stand. A student named Kresh raised one of his tentacles. Kresh came from a water world where his species had evolved to regenerate lost limbs and breathe both air and liquid. His people had conquered 12 star systems by adapting to any environment. On my home world, we have a saying, Kresh announced. If a prey animal defeats you once, it was luck. If it defeats you twice, it has become a predator. This human is making us look like prey. Another student spoke up from the crowd. Eula belonged to a species that had evolved on a frozen world where only the strongest survived winter. Her people were natural hunters with ice-blue skin and reflexes faster than lightning. My ancestors ate creatures like humans for breakfast. She said, her voice as cold as her home planet. If word reaches our worlds that we lost to such a weak species, we will be laughed at by our own families. More voices joined the discussion. Students from gas giant worlds complained that their natural ability to survive in any atmosphere meant nothing if a human could outsmart them. Students from high-gravity planets said their superior strength was useless against human cleverness. Students from worlds with multiple suns claimed their enhanced vision could not help them see solutions that only humans seem to find. Vex let the complaints continue for several minutes before raising his arms for silence. He had expected this reaction. Every species in the galaxy had been taught that their natural advantages made them superior to others. The idea that a species with no obvious advantages could beat them all was too threatening to accept. The problem is clear, Vex continued, but the solution is not. We cannot simply challenge the human. To more contests, he has already proven that he can find ways to win no matter what we throw at him. We need a different approach. What do you suggest? Asked a student whose species looked like walking crystals that could process information at the speed of light. We need to make his life here impossible, Vex replied. If we cannot defeat him in direct competition, we will make sure he fails in every other way. We will sabotage his assignments. break his equipment, and ensure that he cannot succeed at anything. We will not break the school's rules against violence, but we will make him so miserable that he chooses to leave on his own. The crowd began to murmur with approval. This was a plan they could understand. Instead of competing with the human, they would simply make it impossible for him to compete at all. Kor stood up, his massive frame casting shadows across half the gathering. I volunteer to break his laboratory equipment. He rumbled. My people know how to make accidents look natural. Zila slithered forward. I can steal his homework assignments and hide them where he will never find them. My speed makes me almost invisible when I want to be. Brix nodded his oversized head. I will spread false information about his test answers to the teachers. My reputation for honesty means they will believe whatever I tell them. One by one, students volunteered for different parts of the sabotage plan. Some would interfere with his computer access. Others would make sure he could not find books in the library. A few would even contaminate his food to make him sick before important exams. But Trix raised one of his 4 hands, and the crowd fell silent. What if these methods do not work? He asked. What if the human finds ways around our sabotage, just like he found ways around our challenges? Then we escalate. Vex replied with a dangerous smile in his voice. We challenge him to contests that seem fair, but are actually impossible for any human to win. We will make the challenges so specific to our natural abilities that even his creativity cannot save him. For example, Kresh suggested we could challenge him to an underwater breathing contest. My people can extract oxygen directly from water. No human technology could match that or a contest. In extreme cold, Eula added, my species can survive temperatures that would freeze human blood in seconds, or a strength contest using materials from my home world. Kor rumbled rocks that only my people know how to handle properly. The suggestions continued. For hours, students proposed challenges based on abilities that only their species possessed. Flying contests for naturally winged beings. Memory tests using languages that hurt human brains to hear, mathematics using number systems that required multiple simultaneous thought processes. Each suggestion seemed foolproof. Each challenge appeared impossible for a human to overcome. And with nearly 1,000 different species contributing ideas, they were certain they could find something that would finally prove human inferiority. As the meeting ended, Vex felt confident for the first time since the puzzle box incident. The human had been lucky so far, but luck could not last forever. When faced with the combined efforts of 1,000 superior beings, one primitive human would finally be forced to admit defeat. The conspiracy was formed, the trap was set, and tomorrow they would begin the systematic destruction of everything Kyungsoo Park had achieved. None of them considered the possibility that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. None of them wondered if perhaps their definition of superiority needed to be reconsidered. And none of them realized that by working together against a single human, they had already admitted something they were not ready to face. They had admitted they were afraid. Kyungsoo Park stood at the window of the transport ship, watching the massive space station grow larger and larger in front of him. The Galactic Education Center looked like a giant crystal floating in the black void of space. Its walls glowed, with soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat, making the whole structure seem alive. He pressed his face against the cold glass and felt his stomach twist with nervousness. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for his entire life. The first human to attend the most famous school in the galaxy, where the smartest beings from 1,000 different worlds came to learn. The other passengers on the transport ship were all alien students returning from vacation. Most of them ignored the small human boy sitting alone in the corner, but a few stared at him with curious eyes that glowed in colors he had never seen before. Some had tentacles instead of arms, others had scales that shimmered like metal, and a few looked like walking trees with bark for skin. When the ship docked at the station, Kyungsoo grabbed his old backpack and followed the crowd through the airlock. The moment he stepped into the station, he felt like he had entered a different universe. The ceiling stretched so high above his head that he could barely see it, and the walls were covered with moving pictures that showed scenes from planets across the galaxy. Students walked through the halls in groups, talking in languages that sounded like music or thunder, or the whisper of wind through leaves. Some floated above the ground without touching the floor, Others moved on dozens of tiny legs like giant spiders, and a few seemed to phase in and out of existence. Like ghosts, Kyung-soo felt very small and very alone as he made his way to the registration office. The alien behind the desk had 4 arms and purple skin that changed colors when it moved. It looked at him with 3 yellow eyes and made a sound like clicking metal. The translation device in Kyung-soo's ear turned the sounds into words he could understand. "We have not had a human student in 50 years, the alien said while typing something into a computer, with all 4 hands. "Your species is listed in our database as primitive and physically weak. Are you sure you belong here?" Kyung-soo straightened his shoulders and looked directly into the alien's 3 eyes. "I passed all the entrance exams," he said quietly. "I earned my place here just like everyone else." The alien made another clicking sound that might have been laughter. "Very well, human. You are assigned to dormitory level 7, section 12. Your first class begins in 1 hour. Do try not to embarrass yourself." Getting to his dormitory room was an adventure by itself. The station was so huge that it had its own transportation system with floating platforms that moved through tubes in the walls. Kyung-soo had to ask for directions 3 times and got lost twice before he finally found his room. The dormitory level looked like a street from a futuristic city with doors lining both sides of a long corridor. Each door had a nameplate written in different alien languages. Kyung-soo's room was at the very end, next to a student whose name looked like a series of mathematical symbols inside his room. Everything was too big for him. The bed was designed for someone twice his size. The desk came up to his chest, and the chair was so tall, his feet did not touch the ground when he sat in it. But it was his own space, and that was enough. He unpacked his few belongings and put a picture of his family on the desk. His parents had been so proud when he received his acceptance letter. His little sister had cried when he left Earth 3 months ago. The journey to the station had taken that long, even traveling at faster than light speed. Now, looking at their smiling faces, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Maybe the aliens were right. Maybe humans really were too primitive to belong in a place like this. His first class was called Introduction to Galactic History, and it was held in a room that could fit 1,000 students. The teacher was a tall creature with skin like polished metal and a voice that echoed from speakers built into the walls around. The room students sat in chairs designed for their different body types. Some hung from the ceiling, others floated in tanks of liquid, and a few seemed to absorb information directly through their skin. When Kyung-soo walked into the room, every conversation stopped. All eyes turned to stare at the small human boy with his primitive-looking clothes and his simple backpack. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever until the teacher spoke. "A human," the teacher said in a voice like grinding gears. "How interesting. I have read about your species in historical texts. You are supposed to be barely intelligent enough to use simple tools." Laughter rippled through the room from students who found the idea of a human attending their school amusing. Kyung-soo felt his face turn red, but he kept walking until he found an empty seat in the back row. He sat down carefully, trying to ignore the whispers and giggles that followed him. The lesson began with a holographic display showing the formation of the galaxy billions of years ago. The teacher explained how different species had evolved on different worlds, and how they had eventually met each other when they learned to travel between stars. Kyung-soo listened carefully and took notes in his simple paper notebook while the other students recorded everything directly into their advanced computers. He noticed something strange, though. The other students seemed to memorize every word the teacher said, but they did not ask any questions. They accepted every fact without wondering why it was true or how it connected to other facts. When the teacher mentioned a war between 2 ancient civilizations, Kyung-soo raised his hand. The entire room turned to stare at him again, as if he had done something shocking. "Yes, human," the teacher said with what sounded like amusement. "Do you have a question?" Kyung-soo cleared his throat. "You said this war lasted for 300 years, but both civilizations were known for being logical and efficient. Why would logical beings fight a war that long instead of finding a peaceful solution?" The room fell silent. The teacher stared at him with unblinking metal eyes, and for a moment Kyung-soo thought he had said something wrong. That is an interesting question, human. The teacher finally said, I do not think anyone has ever asked that before. After class ended, the other students filed out of the room in their usual groups, but none of them spoke to Kyung-soo. He gathered his things, slowly feeling more alone than ever. As he reached the door, a voice called out behind him. Hey, human. He turned around to see a group of students approaching him. They were led by a large reptile-like being with scales that looked like armor and teeth that could probably bite through metal. The translation device told him the creature's name was Vex. You asked a good question in there. Vex said, but his tone did not sound friendly. We heard that humans are supposed to be creative problem solvers. Is that true? Kyung-soo nodded, not sure where this conversation was going. Vex smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Perfect. There is something we want to test. He led Kyung-soo and the growing crowd of students to the cafeteria, where a strange metal box sat on one of the tables. It was covered with buttons and dials and seemed to change shape slightly when nobody was looking directly at it. This is a Zephyrian puzzle box, Vex explained. It has been sitting here unsolved for 6 months. The smartest students in the school have tried to open it using every method they could think of. If you can solve it, we will leave you alone for the rest of the term. If you cannot, you will do our homework assignments. For the next year, Kyung-soo picked up the box and examined it carefully. The other students had obviously tried to force it open or follow some kind of instruction manual, but as he turned it over in his hands, he noticed something they had missed. The box was not just a puzzle, it was a test of observation. While everyone watched, he turned the box upside down, pressed 3 small buttons at the same time, and gave it a gentle twist. The box opened with a soft musical note, revealing a glowing crystal inside. The cafeteria fell completely silent. Vex stared at the open box with his mouth hanging open, showing all of his dangerous teeth. The other students looked shocked and confused, as if they could not believe what they had just seen. One human had solved in minutes what 1,000 alien students could. Not solve in months? How did you do that? Vex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kyung-soo smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. Sometimes the answer is not about being the strongest or the smartest, he said. Sometimes you just have to look at things differently. As he walked away from the crowd of stunned alien students, Kyung-soo felt something he had not expected. He felt proud to be human. The news of Kyung-soo's puzzle box victory spread through the Galactic Education Center like wildfire. By the next morning, every student in the massive space station had heard about the human who solved something that had stumped their best minds. For 6 months, some were impressed, but most felt angry and confused. Vex could not sleep that night. He kept thinking about how easily the small human had opened the box that he and his friends had tried to crack for weeks. His pride was hurt, and his reputation as the toughest student in school was in danger. If word got back to his home planet that he had been outsmarted by a primitive human, his family would never let him live it down. During breakfast in the great cafeteria, Vex gathered his closest friends around a table in the center of the room where everyone could see them. There was Kor, who looked like a walking mountain made of rock and metal. There was Zila, whose snake-like body could move faster than most students could think, and there was Trix, who had 4 arms and could calculate complex math problems in his head faster than most computers. The human got lucky yesterday, Vex said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Real challenges require more than just clever thinking, they require strength, speed, and true intelligence. We need to show everyone that humans are still the weakest species in the galaxy. His friends nodded in agreement. They had all grown up on worlds where being strong, fast, or smart meant you were better than everyone else. The idea that a small, weak human could be superior to them in any way was impossible to accept. That morning, when Kyung-soo walked into his advanced physics class, he found Vex and his group waiting for him. The classroom fell silent as other students sensed that something important was about to happen. Human Vex announced, standing up so everyone could see his impressive size. Yesterday was just beginner's luck. Today we will have real tests that show what you are truly capable of. Kyung-soo sat down at his desk and looked up at the large reptilian student calmly. What kind of tests? He asked. Vex smiled, showing his dangerous teeth. 3 trials. Physical combat to test your strength. A race through the obstacle course to test your speed, and a memory challenge to test your intelligence. If you win all three, we will admit that humans might not be completely worthless. If you lose even one, you will serve as our personal assistant for the rest of the school year. The other students in the classroom began whispering excitedly. Some were taking bets on how quickly the human would lose. Others wondered if he would be brave enough to accept such an impossible challenge. Kyung-soo thought for a moment. He knew he could not match any of these aliens in raw physical ability, but he also knew that humans had survived on Earth by being clever rather than strong. I accept, he said simply, but I want to add one condition. If I win all three trials, you and your friends will help me with my homework for the rest of the year. Bex laughed so hard that his scales rattled. Deal, human. You will regret this. The first trial took place that afternoon in the school's combat training arena. It was a huge room with a floor made of some kind of energy that could absorb impacts without breaking. The walls were lined with seats where hundreds of students gathered to watch what everyone expected to be a very short fight. Kor stepped into the center of the arena, and the floor glowed brighter under his massive weight. He was twice as tall as Kyung-soo and probably weighed 10 times as much. His skin looked like it was made of solid rock with pieces of metal growing out of it like armor. His fists were the size of small boulders. This is not fair. Someone in the crowd shouted. That human will be crushed in seconds. Kyung-soo walked to the center of the arena, carrying nothing but his confidence. He had studied martial arts back on Earth, not because he wanted to fight, but because his grandfather had taught him that understanding how to move your body was important for understanding how to move your mind. The referee, an alien with tentacles for arms, raised one appendage in the air. Begin, he announced. Kor immediately charged forward like a giant stone bulldozer. His strategy was simple: smash into the human and end the fight before it really started. But Kyung-soo had been expecting this. He stepped to the side at the last possible second, and Kor crashed into the wall behind him with a sound like thunder. The crowd gasped. Some had never seen anyone move that fast. Others wondered if the human had somehow cheated. Kor turned around more carefully this time and swung one of his massive fists at where Kyung-soo had been standing. But the human was no longer there. He had ducked under the punch and was now behind the giant alien. For the next 10 minutes, Kyung-soo danced around Kor like water flowing around a rock. He never tried to hit hard. Instead, he aimed for weak spots where the rock-like skin was thinner or where joints connected. He used his opponent's size against him, making the big alien work harder and harder to try to land a single blow. Finally, Kor collapsed too, his knees breathing heavily. His massive body was not designed for long fights, and he had exhausted himself trying to catch an opponent who moved like smoke. Victory to the human, the referee announced. The second trial took place immediately after the first trial ended. The obstacle course was built in another part of the station, and it was designed to test every possible physical ability. Students had to climb walls, jump across gaps, crawl through tight spaces, and solve puzzles while moving as fast as possible. Zila was confident she would win easily. Her snake-like body could move through spaces that would be impossible for most other species. She could slither up walls that others had to climb and squeeze through holes that would stop anyone with a solid skeleton. The course begins now, the referee announced. Zila shot forward like a green lightning bolt, using her natural advantages to race through the first section of the course. She could move in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics, twisting and bending her body into shapes that hurt to look at. But Kyung-soo was not trying to copy her movements. Instead, he was using his own advantages. He swung across gaps using his backpack as a rope. He climbed walls by jamming his fingers and toes into tiny cracks that other students could not see. He rolled under barriers instead of trying to go around them. The most impressive moment came when both racers reached a section with a 20-foot-high wall that was completely smooth. Zila began slithering up it using special scales on her belly that could grip any surface. Kyung-soo studied the wall for a few seconds, then picked up several small stones from the ground. He threw the stones at the wall in a specific pattern, creating tiny holes that were just big enough for his fingers. Using these handholds, he climbed the wall almost as fast as Zila could slither up it. When they reached the final section, they were neck and neck. Both racers could see the finish, Line ahead of them, Zila put on a final burst of speed that should have been impossible to match. But Kyung-soo had saved his energy throughout the race by finding easier paths through each obstacle. He sprinted toward the finish line with everything. He had left arriving 3 seconds before Zila crossed victory to the human. The referee announced again. The crowd was no longer laughing. Some students looked worried. Others seemed angry that their expectations were being shattered. But everyone was paying attention now. They wanted to see what would happen in the final trial. The memory challenge would take place in the school's main library, where information from across the galaxy was stored. The test was simple. Both contestants would have 1 hour to study a 1,000-page book about galactic law. Then they would be questioned about every detail. Zila chose her species' greatest scholar to replace her in this trial. Brix had a brain 3 times the size of a normal being's head and could memorize entire libraries without forgetting a single word. His species had conquered 12 worlds using their superior intelligence. "This is where your luck runs out," Human Vex said as they prepared for the final trial. "Raw intelligence cannot be." Faked Kyung-soo nodded and sat down with his copy of the law book. Brix immediately began reading at incredible speed, his eyes moving across each page faster than Kyung-soo could blink. Within 30 minutes, he had finished the entire book and spent the remaining time reviewing everything he had memorized. Kyung-soo read much more slowly. He could not memorize facts as quickly as Brix, but he was doing something different. He was thinking about how different laws connected to each other and why they had been created in the first place. When the hour ended, both contestants faced a panel of judges who began asking questions about the book. The first questions were simple, asking for specific facts and dates. Both contestants answered correctly, but then the questions became more complex, requiring understanding rather than just memory. The judges asked about situations that were not directly covered in the book and required applying multiple laws together. Brix could repeat any fact from the book perfectly, but when faced with new problems, he could only guess. Kyung-soo might not remember every detail, but he could think through the solutions step by step, using logic and reasoning. Final victory to the human. The referee announced for the 3rd time. The crowd sat in stunned silence as Kyung-soo stood up and looked at Vex and his friends. "Now about that homework help deal," he said with a small smile. The challenge arrived at Kyung-soo's dormitory room at dawn, delivered by a floating message drone that projected a holographic image of Vex, standing with nearly 1,000 alien students behind him. The reptilian leader looked directly into the camera with his cold yellow eyes as he spoke. "Human, you have embarrassed us for the last time. Today we offer you one final challenge that will settle this matter forever. We will gather our 1,000 best students and compete against you in every subject taught at this school: mathematics, science, history, art, physical fitness, strategy, and problem solving." Vex paused and his smile showed every one of his sharp teeth. "If you lose even one category, you will publicly admit that humans are an inferior species and leave this school forever. If by some impossible chance you win every category, we will acknowledge that perhaps humans are not as worthless as we believed." The message continued. "The competition will take place in the main auditorium, where every student and teacher in the school can witness your defeat. The entire galaxy will know that one human tried to prove himself equal to 1,000 superior beings and failed." Kyung-soo sat on his oversized bed and watched the hologram flicker and disappear. He knew this was exactly what Vex had been building toward from the very beginning. The alien students could not accept that their natural advantages meant nothing against human creativity and determination, so they were going to stack the odds so heavily against him that failure seemed guaranteed. But as he got dressed and prepared for what might be his last day at the school, Kyung-soo felt something unexpected. He felt calm. The past weeks had taught him that humans did not win by being stronger or faster or smarter. They won by refusing to give up and by finding new ways to approach old problems. News of the ultimate challenge spread through the station faster than light-speed communication. By the time Kyung-soo arrived at the main auditorium, every seat was filled. Students hung from the ceiling, floated in the air, and packed the aisles until there was no space left. Teachers from across the galaxy had come to watch. Representatives from major worlds had arrived by emergency transport to witness what they expected to be the final humiliation of humanity. The auditorium itself was a marvel of engineering with a dome that showed real-time images of the galaxy spinning overhead. The central stage could transform into any environment needed for competition, and the acoustic system could translate every word into thousands of different languages simultaneously. Vex stood at the center of the stage with his 1,000 chosen champions arranged behind him in perfect formation. Each alien represented the absolute best that their species could offer. The strongest warriors, the fastest athletes, the smartest scholars, the greatest artists, and the most creative problem solvers from dozens of worlds. Kyung-soo walked onto the stage alone, carrying nothing but his simple backpack and his determination. The contrast was dramatic. One small human facing an army of aliens who towered over him glowed with natural energy or bristled with evolutionary advantages that had taken millions of years to develop. The first competition was mathematics. The aliens brought forward their greatest mathematical minds, beings whose species had been solving complex equations since before humans learned to count massive. Brains that could process numbers at the speed of light and calculate solutions to problems that would take human computers years to solve. But when the problems were presented, Kyung-soo did not try to compete with their raw calculating power. Instead, he looked for patterns and shortcuts that made complex problems simple. While the aliens worked through enormous calculations step by step, he found elegant solutions that reduced difficult equations to basic principles when faced with a problem about calculating the orbital mechanics of a 50-planet star system. The aliens began working through millions of gravitational interactions. Kyung-soo noticed that the planets formed symmetrical patterns and used basic geometry to find the answer, in minutes instead of hours. The second competition was science. The aliens presented experts who knew every fact about physics, chemistry, and biology. Their minds contained the complete scientific knowledge of civilizations that had mastered space travel when Earth was still covered with primitive oceans. But science was not just about knowing facts, it was about understanding how the universe worked. When presented with new problems they had never seen before, the aliens could only apply known solutions. Kyung-soo could reason through unknown situations by understanding the basic principles that governed all natural phenomena. During a chemistry challenge involving unknown compounds from a newly discovered world, the aliens tried to identify the substances by comparing them to everything in their vast databases. Kyung-soo studied how the compounds reacted with each other and deduced their properties from first principles. The pattern continued through every category. In history, the aliens knew more facts, but Kyung-soo understood how past events connected to create the present. In art, the aliens had perfect technique, but Kyung-soo created something original that made people feel emotions they had never experienced before. In physical fitness, the aliens were stronger and faster, but Kyung-soo was more adaptable, finding ways to overcome each challenge through strategy rather than raw ability. In strategy games, the aliens knew every classic move, but Kyung-soo invented new approaches that they had never encountered. The most impressive victory came during the final challenge, a test of pure problem-solving ability. The aliens presented a situation that seemed impossible. A damaged space station losing life support with 1,000 different systems failing simultaneously, and only minutes to find a solution. The alien experts immediately began trying to fix each system individually, using their specialized knowledge of advanced technology. But there were too many problems and not enough time. Even working together, they could not address every failure before the station would become uninhabitable. Kyung-soo studied the situation for 30 seconds, then did something that shocked everyone watching. Instead of trying to fix the failing systems, he found a way to reroute power and life support through the station's emergency backup network. The solution required using systems in ways they were never designed for, but it would keep everyone alive. By the end of the day, Kyung-soo had won every single category, not because he was stronger or faster or smarter than any individual alien, but because he could think in ways that none of them had ever learned. The auditorium fell completely silent as the results were announced. 1,000 of the galaxy's best students, representing the most advanced civilizations in known space, had been defeated by one human who refused to accept that anything was impossible. Kyung-soo stood up and looked out at the crowd of alien students and teachers. Many looked shocked. Others seemed angry, but some appeared thoughtful, as if they were beginning to understand something important. "I did not win because humans are better than you," he said in a voice that carried clearly through. "The vast space I won because I never stopped trying to find new ways to solve problems. That is what makes humans special. We do not just use the abilities we are born with. We figure out how to do things that should be impossible." He paused and looked directly at Vex, who was staring at him with an expression of complete bewilderment. "You have spent your whole lives believing that being strong or fast or smart makes you superior. But the universe does not care about your natural advantages. It only cares about your willingness to adapt and grow and never give up." The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then slowly, one alien student began to applaud. Others joined in until the entire auditorium was filled with the sound of 1,000 different species showing respect for something they had never understood before. From that day forward, the Galactic Education Center changed. Alien students began asking Kyung-soo to teach them how to think like humans. They learned that being the strongest or fastest or smartest was not as important as being willing to try new approaches when old ones failed. And across the galaxy, other species began to realize that humans might be the most dangerous beings in the universe. Not because of their weapons or technology, but because they refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. The human who had arrived as an outsider became the most respected student in the school, and the lesson he taught would echo through the stars for generations to come. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing that you can always find a way.